2015 chats here that are being hosted out of CBC Hamilton. I'm Malcolm Kelly from CBC in Toronto, and with me today we have Doug Gellivan from Montreal. Hello, Doug.
Hello.
We have Jeff Green from CBC Hamilton. Hello, Jeff.
Hi there.
We have Adam Hunter with us from Saskatchewan. Hello, Adam.
Hi, Malcolm. Hi, guys.
And joining us from the left coast, we have Karen Larson from Vancouver. Hello, Karen.
I'm glad you could fit one of us Westerners in, Malcolm.
Well, actually, we have two, so I'm happy about that. But the playing story of the day begins in Montreal, where the Alouettes went into this year's season hoping that their combination of John Crompton and Dan Lefebvre was going to take them away, and now they have neither.
Yeah, it's a tough situation in Montreal now. I mean, the quarterback situation coming into the year with Crompton and Lefebvre was questionable at the best of times. Crompton did lead the Alouettes to the playoffs and a playoff victory last year, but didn't have statistical strengths behind him in most of his games playing last year. So there was that question mark if he was going to be the guy anyway. Now that he's gone down with what appears to be a bruised shoulder, and then Lefebvre coming in and going down after only a couple of plays, it's all coming down on the shoulders of Brandon Bridge right now. He's the Canadian quarterback from Mississauga, Ontario. And, you know, he did make a couple of ill-advised throws last night, but his receivers didn't necessarily help him out either. But the situation for the quarterbacks in Montreal right now, it's pretty dire. I mean, of the 5 that they still have on the roster, 4 of them are on the injured list right now, and the only one who's able to play is Brandon Bridge. The question was last night, I mean, who's next if Bridge goes down? And apparently that's S.J. Green coming off the bench, going from the receiver role into behind the quarterback role. They're going to have to sign somebody this week because the Montreal Alouettes situation at quarterback is very thin right now. If they don't find someone to sort of fill in that role, Brandon Bridge will be the guy moving forward. But looks like it's going to be a long year in Montreal as the quarterback situation went from questionable to very problematic last night as they lost their first game of the season against Ottawa.
Gee, I wonder if Troy Smith is available. Speaking of problems at quarterback, let's go out to the West Coast. And Karen, the BC Lions may be on the edge of a precipice here as they go into the season with one experienced quarterback with one very sore body.
Yeah, there's a big question mark with Travis Lulay. 3 shoulder surgeries in the last couple of years. He played 2 games last season, Malcolm, and he's supposed to be coming back strong. He's been seeing, very limited throws in training camp. Looked okay in the preseason. It seems the receivers are saying he has that old zip back on the ball. So hopefully the arm and the shoulder are back where they were, around his MOP years in 2011 when the Lions won the Grey Cup. But it's a big question mark. The BC Lions are one play away from just a disaster of a season because John Beck, the veteran backup, he's starting the season injured. So they've got 2 rookies behind Beck, and they would be it would be a decision between Jonathan Jennings and Greg McGee as to who the Lions would go to if Lulay goes down. And they have injuries on their O-line as well. And so that's going to be a problem for Lulay, especially Hunter Stewart at left tackle. And so, like I said, one play away from, the start of the season maybe being the end of the season for the BC Lions.
This is going to dovetail into our next discussion, but as we're going across the country, we know, for example, that Calgary has an embarrassment of riches of quarterback behind Bo Levi Mitchell. I think out in Edmonton, they're also an interesting situation because Mike Riley has a healthy Matt Nichols behind him, and I've always been a fan of Nichols, and I think he's a very good quarterback, leading us to Regina, where, speaking of quarterback disasters, 2014 went right down the tubes after an 8-2 start when Darian Durant went down.
How did it ever, Malcolm? I think that's one player that obviously you don't want to lose your starting quarterback, as Doug and Karen both alluded to. But last year for the Riders, you had Tino Sunseri come in. The Riders have already cut him. He didn't even crack the 3rd string. And they brought in Kerry Joseph, of course, last year. Many fans hoping that they would bring in a couple guys to develop. The season was maybe a lost cause at that point. It didn't decide to do that. They wanted to go for it. Joseph threw a bunch of interceptions in the playoff game. It was pretty much a disastrous end of the season, but Durant's healthy now. His elbow is completely healed, and he has a lot of veteran receivers. The Riders, I think, have one of the most experienced receiving corps in the league, probably next to Montreal. They brought in Jamel Richardson, who's coming off his own injury problems, hasn't played for a year and a half. So the Riders fans excited to see how Richardson responds and whether Durant can find him. They need that kind of big target to move the chains. They've been missing that over the last few years.
And as we move east through Winnipeg, in Winnipeg is an interesting situation, of course, because Drew Willie is the starter there, and he was at the beginning of last year the greatest find in the history of Winnipeg football. And then he struggled near the end of the season, and I'm wondering here what's going to happen, because there's already people in Winnipeg who are saying that, well, you know, maybe he might be out earlier than you think. So that's the West, and in the East, I think things are even more interesting. But we should start with the probably should have been the Grey Cup champion Hamilton Tiger Cats, but for a questionable flag. And we'll go to Jeff to talk about the quarterbacking situation in Hamilton.
You must be talking to some people on King Street, because they still think that they won the Grey Cup. We have probably one of the best quarterback situations. We've got Zach Claris going into his second year. He missed half of the last season. Well, not half, but 5 games last season with the concussion, and came back to start and turn around the Tiger Cats season. I mean, they were a 2-7 season and finished 7-2. And so you have both Caleros, who was sharp in preseason. He went in Ottawa, threw in the first half, 14 of 17, 183 yards in just 25 minutes. So he's ready to go. He's got a couple more American receivers, and he's looking at a very tight group. He also has a good backup, just in case if things do go off the rails. He's got Jeff Matthews, who played under Ken Austin's system for 3 years at Cornell University. So across the league, while you may be wondering if you're on the edge on the left coast with your quarterback situation here in Hamilton, it seems to be pretty solid.
Through Toronto we go, where the pride of Edinburgh State, Trevor Harris, is going to be quarterbacking the Toronto Argonauts for the first 6 games, as Ricky Ray continues to be on the injured list with his shoulder. And a very good source told me yesterday he's not ready for prime time, so it's going to be interesting to see how long that takes. And of course, there's the Ottawa Rough Riders, where their 40-year-old quarterback still continues to have a good half and a bad half. And last night, bad Henry Burrs had a lousy first half with 3 interceptions, and then had a very good second half. And that, I think, may be what you're going to see. So this opens up an interesting conversation, because the CFL has been very concerned the last couple of years with a drop in the amount of scoring. And it struck me this morning when I was getting my notes together, that the CFL now wants to be able to open their game up and become a high-scoring game like the National Football League. And my word, for 40 years we've been talking about how the CFL is wide open and the NFL is boring, and now it seems to have changed a little bit. Karen, are you convinced that with the quarterbacking situation, especially in the league, that we may see more scoring this year with the new rules that have been brought in to try to open up the game again?
Well, sure, they sure are trying hard to increase the scoring, aren't they? You look at that slate of rule changes across the board. It's going to be really interesting. It's going to be really interesting out here in BC, where I think the receiving core, the Courtney Taylors, the Manny Arsenaults, and the Lions picked up Austin Collie, former, who had great career in the NFL, suffered a concussion, is now trying to work his way back into football, has some Canadian heritage as well. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do. Of course, all predicated on a healthy Travis Lulay, like we talked about earlier. But I'm really hopeful that it'll make a big difference for the BC Lions, and it'd be nice to see a little bit more scoring, a little bit more offense, because obviously, it makes for a more appealing product. And the CFL really does need to do everything it can to keep the fans that are watching it now interested and grow that fan base as well.
Doug, from your standpoint, Do you feel that the problem with scoring in this league is more quarterback? We're in a bit of a down when it comes to quarterbacks, or is there really something wrong with the game?
No, I agree with you. I think it's just the talent of quarterback that is really the big factor in if the teams are going to be scoring or not. And I've looked at all the rule changes that the league has put in for this year to try to increase the scoring. And, well, it's a valiant effort. What we've seen, especially in the preseason and even last night here in Montreal, is that the rule changes essentially just mean there's a lot more flags on the ground so far. So while they're trying to sort of increase the offense by allowing the receivers to get more free releases off the line and essentially calling a lot more pass interference calls, they were talking about increasing the flow of the game as well with these rule changes. Haven't seen that come to fruition yet, and I'm not entirely sure what moving the extra point back to the 25-yard line does for increasing the scoring, because we saw last night that it will actually take points off the board for certain teams. So while they're trying to sort of open up the game and let the athletes do a little bit more, maybe we're in an adjustment period here. But for right now, I think it's more about what the players do on the field and the talent that they're recruiting to the CFL. That's more important than changing the rules and putting these kind of gimmicks into the game to try to boost the excitement level. Yes, I mean, when you take an extra point away, it kind of changes how teams chase points and whatnot. But what you really want to see is just players making plays out there. And until the defensive backs sort of adjust to this new way that they're calling the rules, we're going to see actually much slower games and maybe even fewer exciting scoring plays, because you're taking away a defender's opportunity to disrupt those passes, and taking away opportunities for the ball to be kicked back and forth is where we see a lot of the exciting plays in the CFL anyway. So the league is doing its best with these rule changes, but I'm not entirely sure that's going to make for a more exciting product right off the bat. And like you said, with the NFL being outscoring the CFL for the first time in more than a couple decades last season, there's lots of work to be done. And I think that's a talent level, not necessarily a format of the game situation there.
Adam, out in Saskatchewan, where green is the color and big numbers on the scoreboard are the game, is there a concern out there that this is going to be a long-term thing, or do you feel that this is something that's going to be able to fix itself relatively quickly?
I think we'll be able to judge it in a year or two. I think it's probably too early. I know that after that first preseason game between Saskatchewan, Edmonton, and Fort McMurray, it was like a 4-hour game, and there were a record number of flags, and I think that really turned some people off and worried some people that this season is going to be just marred by flags. I think it's an adjustment period not only for the players but also for the coaches and the referees. So I'll be really interested to see the rest of the weekend how it's officiated. I thought last night's game there wasn't a ton of flags, but I agree with what the CFL is doing. I thought last year was one of the worst years actually in my experience watching the CFL as far as entertainment on the field. And I think it is a product also of seeing guys like Travis Lulay, Darian Durant go down, Drew Willie struggling, who's a young quarterback. We lost Anthony Calvillo to the league. So there's all these very experienced guys who can put points on the board who weren't playing, and I think that contributed as much as anything to the lack of scoring last year.
Jeff, over in Hamilton, you've got a man who knows how to design offenses in head coach Austin. Is there a feeling among him or among his people out there that that this is just one of those passing things, pardon the pun, or is and this is something that just given some time they'll be able to straighten this out?
I think when you introduce rule changes like that, maybe it goes back to the clutch and grab in hockey. It takes some time to kind of iron out through the system and allow people to understand what's going to be a flag. So, yeah, we're going to see a lot of flags now. I think that will smooth out throughout the rest of the season. I think that the rule changes allowing the receivers to get a little bit more of a jump actually hurts Hamilton specifically because of the secondary. We're losing Devin Burrow. And so it's a little bit of a bad rule in terms of Hamilton going to give up a lot of passing yards. But in terms of the other side of the ball, it frees up players, and the other rule changes, especially on kick returns, it frees up big-time players. You're looking at Chris Williams in Ottawa and Brendan Banks in Hamilton. I think these combined may take a while, and I see Doug's point in that it is a slow start with the flags, but I think it will iron itself out. So I'm on the CFL side on this one. I think the rule changes will open it up, and definitely play into Hamilton's favor, unfortunately, on both sides of the ball.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see, I think, speaking as the old person in this group, who came of age in the 70s, back in the olden days, you weren't allowed to breathe on a receiver after 5 yards. And the defensive backs seemed to work it out. Though back then, closing speed was really important. The ball's in the air. You had to be able to close that gap. And I think we're going to see this year, who's got real athletic ability in the defensive backfields. Speaking of athletic ability and having to dodge and weave, Jeffrey Orridge has taken over as the new commissioner of the Canadian Football League, and the rookie commissioner's had to deal with an awful lot in his first 6 weeks on the job. Not the least of which is the controversy that blew up over the drug policy or perceived lack thereof in the league. And without getting deeply into it, of course, the league, when a player is first found to have used performance-enhancing drugs, they go on the name is not announced, and they go on a program of rehabilitation. Second time is a 3-game suspension. Third time is a 1-year suspension, and which effectively would end a career, but. It's the people who run the lab in Montreal, working with WADA, have complained that this is not an effective policy. And after a couple of weeks of yelling back and forth, the CFL announced this week, just yesterday actually, that it's going to work with the Players Association to create a new policy that'll close some of the gaps in it. And I wanted to ask Karen, is this all important? Does this mean anything to the CFL fan? Does it mean anything to the integrity of the Canadian Football League moving forward?
Well, of course, that depends who you talk to, so that's an interesting question. Personally, I would say the CFL really has to figure this out and figure it out quickly. Football is one of those sports where steroid abuse has been known to take place, and in fact, in a lot of programs, it's been revealed to be a real widespread problem, and so. They have to get this thing figured out now, because it's what happens, 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road with these athletes when their careers are finished, and their perhaps the things they're putting in their body now come back to haunt them as older men, and we're seeing it across all sorts of sports and leagues, and the CFL really has to figure this one out and get it right, and they have to. For the programs beneath them, the university programs and the junior football programs across Canada as well.
Adam, out there in Saskatchewan on the prairie, university football is a very big deal. And something that's happened, of course, with the CIS players is they've discovered a loophole that they can actually get onto PEDs right after they finish their final season in the CIS. And if they test positive at the CFL draft combine in March, then basically what they get is kind of an academic probation rather than kicked out of the league. Do you think that the real thing about this drug policy, Adam, is the young players, or do you think it goes much deeper than that?
I think that's a great place to start. I think the CIS coaches have pointed out that it's hard for them to sort of tell the players, hey, don't stay no to drugs, and then you have a few players get drafted who tested positive. The Riders drafted a player named Melvin Abanqua from St. Mary's who tested positive, and he can't go back to school. They cut him, so he can't play football. But he could have played for the Riders if he would have made the team. And I think that is a really shining example of the huge gap in the drug policy and a message it's sending to young players out there. And if they can get an edge, any sort of edge, they're going to take it. And especially with this loophole still being there. And I think the CFL's been behind. There's been rumblings through the years that, if you go through the locker room, you see a guy who's just exploded from one year to the next, and you say, hey, I wonder what that guy's on. He's trying to get to the NFL, and then when he gets down there, there'll be more stringent kind of drug testing. But with the CFL, he can have a big year and really make money for himself. So I think the CFL's really they're behind, and they're trying to play catch up, and this hopefully is a bit of a wake-up call.
And this is something that Orridge spoke about with me this week when I sat down with him, that he's, as Karen pointed out, that he's concerned about the future of the athletes, what happens to them in the long term, but he's also concerned about making sure that there's a deal in place with the Players Association that will allow them to do something to close that loophole. I wanted to ask Jeff, from his feeling, this is a league that there's only had a drug policy since 2010, and it was well known before then that basically, if you wanted to use, you could. But do you think that I don't think desperation's the right thing, but the need or the feeling among a lot of players that this is now a way to get back into the NFL or get to the NFL means that they might be willing to take a few more chances?
That's absolutely the point I wanted to make about this. Is having no suspension on the first offense is simply, and I hate to be blunt, it's just a stupid rule. You're basically telling the players, come to the CFL, dope until you get caught. Nothing will happen until you have your second offense. You're creating a league that can take on players who want to make the NFL and need a forum to display their talents, all the while they can dope and do whatever they want, facilitating, basically they're enabling it, allowing them to get big and move on. And if you want to create that minor league that doesn't suspend dopers, considering that the NFL's policy is a 4-game suspension plus a player named on the first offense, you're so far behind, and you have a great example south of the border that you can emulate and even just straight up copy, and it's right there. So I think it's a really it's tough for the new commissioner to come into an environment like that, especially 7 weeks onto the job, and it's not fair that he was left with the policy that he's been given. But he has a chance now to change that, and I think he still has a chance to kind of come out and be proactive about what the league can do to prevent kind of an enabling league.
Doug, which side of this argument have you come down on? Do you think that it's been fair for the CFL to say to people, look, we're not going to get bullied into it, which is what Orange said, we're not going to get bullied into making changes, but we are going to make changes. Is that fair, do you think? And were you surprised, Doug, at how quickly Orange got Scott Flory and the Players Association online to say, yes, okay, we'll, before we open up the labor agreement again, we're going to see if we can straighten this out?
No, I wasn't surprised because the optics of the whole thing are not good for the league, not good for the CIS, not good for Orange, not good for anybody right now. And the Players Union, Scott Flory, he's a rather reasonable person, and that doesn't really surprise me that he would be on board to sort of move that forward. But I agree that it's the loophole on the CIS level that is the most concerning thing here. If you have players in the league who are using, and that's one thing, but it's a Canadian league, and it's a league where you have these young players who are growing up into this league. They're only going to play a couple of years in the CFL on average, but these are the guys that are going to have to deal with the long-term effects of using if they do decide to do something like that. And you saw it's one player 2 years ago, 5 players this year. I was talking with Glenn Constantine, the coach of the Laval Rouge et Or, and he was just saying, I mean, what's next? 10 players the next year? So there has to be some sort of rapprochement that happens between these groups, because that's where the concern is on the Canadian level. If you want to look at it as sort of the minor league for the NFL, that's another conversation altogether. But we got to think about the Canadian players in this league and the health of these young men coming out of college and having essentially no ramifications for doping leading into them going into the CFL. And they want to make it, even if it's only going to be a couple of years that they're going to play. They want to make it, and then they're going to have to deal with the consequences of the decision to do that in the long term.
Okay, let's finish with a little bit of fun, shall we? We're going to go, let's say, east to west, and we'll give Karen a chance to do this last. But give me your 2 Grey Cup finalists and your winner. And we'll start in Montreal with Doug.
Can I pick 2 teams from the West?
No.
Yeah, it's got to be Hamilton in the East this year. The quarterback situation there is the most solid. Everybody else down the line has issues, and let's go with Calgary. They've got the riches at the quarterback position, and I think it's going to be a really long year here in Montreal. Als fans, buckle up, because with the quarterbacks and the way they are right now, just making the playoffs might be tough, and seeing the team sort of where they were last night, cause for concern. Let's just put it there.
Jeff Green, let's see if we can get you in trouble with Ticats fans.
You could get me close, but there's nothing in the East right now. I mean, you're going to see Ottawa and Hamilton in that East final, and then Hamilton's going to go on and they're going to lose for a third straight time.
Ottawa?
Sorry, no, Ottawa. Hamilton's going to go on and they're going to lose for a third straight Grey Cup appearance, and it's going to be to Calgary, or if BC can stay healthy. I mean, I don't think BC is too far off. I think you have a real wild card in Austin Collie. I mean, he could have an unbelievable season, and we could all be saying, wow, I can't believe Travis Lulay stayed healthy. But it really comes down to that. I think Hamilton goes through, and they lose for the third straight time to either Calgary or BC.
Okay, and quickly, Doug?
Oh, so, me again?
Oh, I'm sorry, not Doug. Quickly, Adam, pardon me.
Yeah, I'll get in trouble with Rider fans. I don't think they're going to make it this year. I'm going to pick Edmonton, actually. I think they have a good combination of a really dominant defense and a good quarterback in Mike Bradley. They're losing John White, the running back, hurts, but I'll take Edmonton to beat Calgary in the West Final, and I'll also put Hamilton in the Grey Cup. And I think Hamilton, and I don't think they're going to lose the third in a row. I'll take the Ticats this year.
And Karen, finally.
Okay, well, I'm going to couch mine. It's all about Travis Lulay, but it's also all about BC Lions defense, which is still as terrific as it was last year with Solomon Elamimian and Adam Bighill in the linebacker position. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and say it will be a BC Lions Hamilton Tiger Cats Grey Cup, and I'm going to pick Hamilton. What the heck? There you go. Got to go out on a limb. Got to mix it up here, little guys.
And I'm going to go with the Cats over the Argos in the East, and I'm going to go with the Riders over Edmonton in the West, and I'm going to go with the Riders to win the Grey Cup. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Doug in Montreal, and Jeff in Hamilton, and Adam in Saskatchewan, and Karen in BC. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on our very first of what we hope will be monthly chats here, hosted by CBC Hamilton. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, good night, Warren Moon, wherever you are.